Welcome, Scott, to the show.
That's right.
Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning.
Morning.
Hello.
So you are the Tombstone Tourist.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the only guy who can get you within 6 feet of your favorite musical artist.
Hello. Now we've had you on the show before, Scott.
Yeah, about 4 years ago.
Was it that long?
Was it that long?
Yeah.
Nah, really?
Yeah, that's when the first edition came out.
Oh,
there
boy.
wasn't a publisher in the world that would touch me.
Wow.
They said there's no way anybody would buy this book, and I self-published, sold 11,000 books out of my house. And Simon & Schuster gave me a call about a year ago and said, okay, maybe we were wrong.
Yeah.
So we did a second edition here. I added 300 new artists for over 500 musical artists, everybody from Karen Carpenter to Frank Zappa and everybody in between, so to speak.
Wow.
And traveled the world over 12 years and compiled this book.
All because you were on our show.
Yes,
That's
yes.
it.
I sold 3 before I got on your show,
Yeah.
and then the other 10,900 just flew right.
That's right. And tonight we're going to sell you some books,
That's
too.
right.
That's exciting.
Scott Stanton is with us. He is the Tombstone Tourist. It's tombstonetourist.com. And this book is dedicated to where you can find the tombs and the grave sites and the shrines of all the late great musicians, people who lived a long life, people who lived a short life. And you have it actually set up. It's interesting how you have the chapters set up here.
Yeah, I have 2 sections. I have
Right.
the legends, and then a section I call the greats, the near greats, the one-hit wonders, and a few really great artists.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like everybody else, because you got your Frank Sinatras and your Beatles and people like that, and then you got your Tommy Bolin's, great guitar player, or people like that just didn't quite make it.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. But we're cool nonetheless.
Totally cool.
And who have rabid followers. It's amazing, like these people that might not be like Tommy Bolin. Maybe not everybody knows, about T-Rex. Maybe some people out there don't. But there are hardcore fans of Bolin. Is that true?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, you got the problem with Mark Bolan and Tommy Bolan. Tommy Bolan was a great guitar player, played with James Gang and Deep Purple, and he's buried out in Sioux City, Iowa.
Right.
There's so many famous rock stars buried there. No, I'm kidding. He's the only one. And but you bring up Mark Bolan and T-Rex.
Yeah.
He's got a very, very simple grave site where his ashes were distributed. But you go find the tree where his car, his little Mini, actually ran into, and it's a freaking shrine. People come there and they lay flowers. There's pictures of them. There's poems. And this is just, an oak tree on the M3 outside of London, England. And it's, if there's a shrine, the fans will find it, they'll mark it, and they will keep it going for much longer than Mark Bolan's career ever lasted.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm just looking at this book. We do a lot of quizzy things on Friday nights, and some of these little mini bios we could use as a quiz even. Now, I'll give you an example. It didn't matter if he came out soaring from the stage in wings, wearing a 200-pound cape covered in seashells and pearls, wearing one of his many piano-shaped rings, encrusted with hundreds of diamonds, sitting behind his favorite Baldwin concert grant. You know who that is, right, Nick?
Huey Lewis? Oh, no. That would be Liberace, yeah.
It's certainly not Siegfried or Roy.
Who is, and where is he buried now, Liberace?
Liberace is buried in Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. He's got some good company there. Andy Gibb is buried right around the corner. Two of the Temptations, Rick Nelson, the drummer from Toto, the gentleman who did not die from spraying fruit trees in his backyard, but of cocaine consumption, and just a host of others. And frankly, I have to give Forest Lawn all the credit for bringing this idea to fruition, because when I went up to the gates, I had found the Allman Brothers in Macon, Georgia, and I photographed it, and I said, maybe I'm on to something here. So on a whim, I was in L.A., and I said, well, I'm going to look up Rick Nelson. Went to the front gates. They would not tell me where he was. And at that point, I realized, when people don't want you to find something, maybe you should find it and let everybody else know where
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it turns out a lot of cemetery managers, I understand that they run a business, but, when you get buried, I'd like to think, you know, when I pass away, at least 2 or 3 people might leave a guitar pick at my grave, or, you know, something, or, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I not only get you at the cemetery, but I truly get you within 6 feet. I give you the plot number, the location, you know.
Why wouldn't they tell you? Forest Lawn wouldn't tell you where Rick Nelson was?
No, they wouldn't tell you anything. In fact, a lot of cemetery managers won't even admit that they have, you know, the famous and near famous.
Well, let me ask you.
I just assume that Forest Lawn. I mean, that's like that's on the tourist itinerary of everybody that goes out to California.
Yeah, but the funny thing is if you look at all other maps, they say, yeah, Rick Nelson's buried in Forest Lawn. But, you know, quite frankly, if you've got 14 days to hike through 100 acres of flat monuments, you know, be my guest.
Yeah.
Now, so how do they feel about you revealing this stuff? Have you heard from Forest Lawn or any of these?
Yeah, Forest Lawn has actually escorted me out of their Glendale location when I was photographing Nat King Cole, and I felt that was kind of a badge of honor because they knew who I was and they escorted me out.
Yeah.
So it's like, cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what you do though is I mean, it's part of celebrity. You know, it's part of this whole thing. I don't understand why people would have a problem with that.
Yeah, and there's nothing ghoulish about it, and rarely do I show up to these cemeteries with picks and shovels, and you know,
rarely.
And but you know, I pay homage to these people. You know, granted, a lot of them died of drug overdoses, alcohol, cocaine, what have you,
right.
And it's a lifestyle that you know, I don't maybe truly understand because I don't have to go on the road in a tour bus, you know, 200 nights a week, you know, away from my family. So, you know, I understand the temptations that are maybe out on the road, and that's why none of these people really lasted much past the age of 30. But, you know, I do it in a very reverential way because I figure a lot of the fans, and truly the fans are quite respectful. They just want to visit their you know, their favorite artist.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's not. It's really. I mean, I know that there have been all these stories about obviously Jim Morrison's grave, which was. Now, tell us a little bit about that because at one point that was just an absolute mess.
That was really the first, I think, really famous international gravesite.
Yeah, where people would go and spray paint and party and leave empty wine bottles. Tell us a little bit about the famous Jim Morrison grave.
Yeah, in the 80s, it got completely out of hand. There was a riot. A lot of people don't realize, but there was a riot of literally 400 or 500 Doors fans during 1 July on the anniversary of his death, and it, you know, tear gas, and like you said, there was graffiti for, you know, a good 100 feet before you even got to his monument. And then you probably heard a couple years ago when he was buried, as most people are in Europe, a lot of times they will do a lease arrangement. And so you'll get a lease for 20, 30, 40 years. And Jim Morrison had a lease for 30 years on his grave. And then generally what they do is they take you out and deposit you in a potter's field or whatever. And then they sell the grave again. And the funny thing was there was this big argument whether they were going to kick him out or not. But anybody who had realized the situation he was buried in, when Pamela Morrison, his girlfriend at the time, quickly threw him in the ground, and that's literally what she did. She bought the cheapest pine casket and the cheapest plot she could find in Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is literally underwater. It's a swampy kind of area. And so even if there was any chance of removing him, it would have been a complete and total mess, and there wasn't much to really remove. Mm-hmm. But his parents came by. They bought the machine that basically cleared all the graffiti out there. They increased security, so it's real nice, clean part, respectful part of the cemetery. And he's there for all eternity. They just bought the lease outright.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's nice that they cleaned it up. I mean, it's cool that like people would show up and and visit it. But like we were just talking about, most of the people that go to these grave sites want to go to pay their respects or take a picture or see, But like in the early '80s when that whole Jim Morrison comeback happened, it was cool to get wasted and listen to the Doors. And that whole like persona that he had, where everybody would go there and get drunk and throw their empty wine bottles around. It was just, I remember seeing a picture circa like 83 or 82 of his grave at that time, and it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, it was just horrible. Really, really tasteless. But the cool thing in looking up all this, originally the idea was I'm just going to photograph these graves and tell people where they're at. And then I started reading stories, and I didn't realize there was a riot there. But it was kind of funny as you start thinking, Jim was the original Lizard King and everything. But then I start researching Gene Vincent, and it turns out Gene Vincent, and during his years when he was in decline, heavy alcohol use, cirrhosis of the liver, etc., he was living in L.A., and Jim Morrison used to follow him around and mimic everything. And Gene Vincent, who was in that severe car crash with Eddie Cochran, the one that killed Eddie Cochran, people thought that he had this really cool swagger, and it was really a really bad limp from his bad leg. And Jim Morrison started emulating that, and then he started wearing the leather pants just like Gene Vincent. So then, you start going back, and you go, okay, well, I got the Jim Morrison grave, now I got the Gene Vincent grave, and now there's this link between the two. And then, the book just kind of flows all that way, as everybody's kind of stealing a little something from the next performer.
I think I was just looking through Mississippi John Hurt. Mm-hmm. I think is the only guy in your book that was listed cause of death, natural causes.
Yeah,
that's about it.
That's it.
Jim Morrison certainly didn't die of natural causes. Here,
No. The entire book is planes, trains, automobiles, knives, guns, shot on stage by an ex-girlfriend, cocaine, alcohol, club.
Right.
I think Buddy Holly is like, at age 24, he was like the average death of the rock stars. You've got people like Richie Valens, who was only 17.
Well, my friends and I were actually talking about musicians who had passed on, and I had forgotten how young Otis Redding was when he died. And by the way, we have a little message from Jim Morrison.
From Jim.
I am a king. I can tell you that.
Okay. But anyway, so Otis Redding, I had thought for some reason, and I guess that's because he seemed older to me. His voice seemed more seasoned. Do you know what I mean? We were discussing it like last week. I was in a bar, of course, discussing this, and I thought he had to be like 32. I thought he was 32, 33 when he died, and he was only 26.
26 years old.
That is unbelievable.
But the cool thing though is so Otis is in that exclusive club of died in a plane crash, Lake Monona. But a lot of people don't realize that there was actually one person who survived that crash, one of the Bar-Kays. And also another thing is Steve Cropper, who co-wrote "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay" and played on a lot of the Otis hits. And he was also in the Blues Brothers. A lot of people remember him as a guitar player in the Blues Brothers.
Right.
His guitar was on that plane, the one that he recorded, Dock of the Bay, and several other hits. When that plane went down, Steve Cropper's guitar went to the bottom of that lake. It was never recovered, and he's never had another hit since that day.
Oh, man.
Now, it gets even weirder. So they recover his plane, and I show a picture of them pulling up the plane, and it says Otis Redding on the side.
Right.
And so the insurance company grabs the plane, looks at it, and says, okay, we're done with it, and they took it to a dump. Well, these two enterprising kids went down to the dump, and they stole the plane out of the dump and took it home. And so I spent probably 7 years looking for anything from that plane, and I went to the Hard Rock Casino in Las Vegas, and as I'm going into the Italian restaurant there, over on the right-hand side is the Otis from the Otis Redding plane.
Oh.
They had bought it from one of the kids.
Oh, man. Now, where is Otis buried? He's buried in Macon, Georgia?
He's buried in Round Hill, just outside Macon, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually buried on the Otis Redding Ranch, where Zelma Redding, his wife, still lives there. And he's literally buried in the front yard, and the closest you can get is most powerful binoculars you can buy, and see him about 300 yards away. You can see the eternal flame from the road. He's buried literally right in front of the house.
Yeah, he was just, one of my favorites of all time.